On behalf of FCA Hawaii and FCA International, aloha. Let's try that again. Aloha. And welcome to day number 3 of the 38th FCA TechNet Asia Pacific Conference. I'm Lieutenant John Deannan from U.S. Pacific Fleet, and it is my pleasure to be your MC this morning on this morning's keynote presentation. We would like to thank Govly, our supporting partner, with this morning coffee break. As a courtesy to our guest speaker and our fellow professionals, we ask that you silence your communication devices at this time. Now, ladies and gentlemen, would you please stand and join me in a Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. Today, we are fortunate to have in the audience tomorrow's leaders and their cadre who are now part of the junior ROTC programs from across the great state of Hawaii. We would like to take a moment and recognize them. Cadets, if you would please stand this morning and be recognized as I mentioned your school. Farrington High School. Kahuku High School. Kaimuki High School. And Waipahu High School. Thank you. Now, will Ms. Tina Jordan, the Vice President, membership of FCA, please come to the stage?
So I don't know how many of you were here for the luncheon. I was called up on stage on Tuesday, and I was so shocked and so humbled that I just didn't even have words. And I don't know if any of you guys remember the Seinfeld episode when George Costanza came up with what he wanted to say, but a little bit too late, so the rest of the episode, he was trying to make that recreate so he could say what he wanted to say. So I just want to thank the Hawaii chapter for my George Costanza moment here, because now I'm composed, and now, before when I was up here, I could only think about how loud my heart was pounding. So thank you. I just wanted to say a few things. This is my last event that I'm doing on behalf of FCA. I've been with FCA for 25 years, 15 as a volunteer, and then 10 on staff. And there's never a good time, thank you, there's never a good time to leave FCA, because there's always something exciting coming up. But for my family and for me, this is the right time. But I just wanted to say thank you to the Hawaii chapter for that amazing, surprising gift and just your hospitality all week to all of us. Thank you to all of our chapter members and volunteers in the room. We have 138 chapters in 30 countries. And we just have an amazing, the folks on staff at FCA couldn't do what we do back in Fairfax without all the amazing volunteers and members of our chapter. So thank you for being part of my FCA journey. Thank you to the headquarters staff. Again, it's hard to leave FCA. I stayed actually 2 extra years when I heard Susan Lawrence was going to come in as our CEO. I wanted to work for her, and it's been amazing. Her leadership and her vision, and with Paul and Mike and Shantae and Sean with the events team and the membership team, Susan Lawrence and the team are just going to take FCA to the next level. And I'm excited that I'll be a life member. I'll continue to get Signal Magazine. I'll continue to get to read the great things that are going on in FCA and what's going on with the chapters. And it is really an exciting time to be in FCA. And it's hard to step down, but amazing what's going to happen in the future. And I'm very excited to see that. If you're not a member of FCA, I'm the head of membership. I VP of membership. I can't leave without saying one thing about membership. If you're not a member of FCA, I encourage you to join. Dick Palmieri wrote a wonderful LinkedIn post yesterday that talked about professionals join professional organizations. Doctors have the American Medical Association, dentists have the ADA, lawyers have the bar. If you're an IT professional doing business with the federal government, AFCEA is your professional organization, and we need you to join. Invest in yourself, invest in your professional organization, and invest in your career. If you're under 40, you are our emerging leaders. We need you. You're the future of the organization, so please join. If you're over 40, we need you too. And we also need you to recruit somebody under the age of 40 to come join. Military and government, it's amazing to me how many MilGov folks join their last 6 months so they can network before they go out into industry. What they're missing is the 20 years of networking before to build that network before they go into industry. So MilGov, join. It's a great place to be. This is your AFCEA Ohana, and it's a great organization to be part of. So I just want to say one more thing in closing. My favorite philosopher is Dr. Seuss. And he has a saying that says, don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened. And when I walk away and I think of each one of you, thank you for being part of my AFCEA journey, and I'm going to smile when I think of you. Mahalo.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, our guest speaker this morning is Colonel Jason Schramm, Deputy Commander, U.S. Space Forces, Indo-Pacific. His bio is available via the AFCEA TechNet Indo-Pacific 23 app. Now, if you have any questions, please go to, right here, to this email right here. If you have any questions, please send it to them. Now, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce this morning keynote speaker. Please join me in a warm welcome for Colonel Jason Schramm, Deputy Commander, U.S. Space Force, Indo-Pacific.
All right, good morning, everybody. Aloha, welcome to day 3 of TechNet. JROTC folks, awesome to see you guys here. Come talk to me afterwards about joining the Space Force, right? All right, cool. I am honored to be able to speak with you today a little bit about our space component that we stood up here in Indo-PACOM and some of our priorities and focus areas. First, I want to thank, I don't know if he's here, Don Thundercloud. He was the one that got a hold of me and invited us to speak today. He recognized that this is the first year that Space Forces Indo-PAC has existed, and he invited us to give remarks, and I really want to thank him for that. So, as he said, I am Colonel Jason Schramm. I'm the Deputy Commander of the U.S. Space Forces Indo-Pacific. I'm here representing my boss, Brigadier General Tony Mastelier. He's just getting back from a trip to Korea, and so he couldn't be here today. He's on the road a lot as we continue to build out our space presence in the theater. He's always meeting with partner military and civilian and commercial partners out there, working to bring new capacity and capability to the fight. So I'm happy to be here today on his behalf to represent the component and speak to you. I also want to start by acknowledging AFCEA. It is such an important organization for connecting military, industry, government, our allies and partners, fostering discussions like the ones that we get to have today, and bringing all of these partners together to further the defense of our nation is critical as we strive to maintain a free and open Indo-Pacific. And the theme this week of accelerating innovation, boy, that's exactly what we see is needed in this theater, where you've got the tyranny of distance that makes things so difficult, trying to find those technological advantages to stay ahead of our rapidly modernizing threats. I'll talk a little bit more about the threats in just a second that we're facing in space, but before I get into the threats and our priorities, let me set the stage for why my organization, Space Force Indo-PAC, even exists. Most of you probably heard that the Space Force began standing up space components last year. And this one, Space Forces Indo-PAC, was the first one to stand up. We stood up just about a year ago in November of 2022. Now, as we all know, combatant commanders, they all have components, and they're generally based on domains, right? So usually you got a land component, an air component, maritime component. Usually you've got Marines and special operations components. So it seemed like probably a natural evolution that as we have this new domain of space, which also we recently earned our own military service, to result in a new component to the combatant commanders, and that's what happened. But I think if you talked with most Space Force officers, and even senior ones, just 10 years ago, most would have probably said we're still quite a ways away from needing our own military branch. So what drove the country to decide back in 2019 that we needed a Space Force? Now, some may say a certain commander-in-chief made it happen, but really the impetus for the Space Force began building in the halls of Congress and in the minds of our national leadership some years before that. Why? It's pretty simple. It's the threat in this theater. So I want to frame up the foundation for the rest of my remarks by giving you some unclassified information to highlight the threats that the United States faces in this theater today. And then that will lead me into a discussion on some space innovations that I think could help us. So let's talk first about the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Liberation Army, or the CCP and the PLA. The PLA's rapidly growing space program, which is now second only to the United States in the number of operational satellites, it's really a source of national pride, and it's part of President Xi's China dream to establish a powerful and prosperous nation. The CCP expects space to play an important role in future conflicts by enabling things like long-range precision strike, denying other militaries the use of their space-based assets, and furthermore, there's a lack of transparency with the systems they're building regarding their doctrine and their capabilities, and that could raise the risk of potential mishaps. Back in 2015, the PLA officially designated space as a new domain of warfare, and they established a strategic support force to integrate space and cyberspace and electronic warfare capabilities into their joint military operations. In 2022, so just last year, the PLA conducted 62 successful space launches, putting over 200 payloads into orbit, more than half of which, a little over 100, were intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance satellites, ISR. It's also continued to develop multiple new rockets, quick response launch vehicles, and commercial lift systems. Since the end of 2015, the PLA's on-orbit presence has grown by 379%. It's an addition of 561 satellites. As of April this year, they had a total of 709 satellites on orbit, and there's more today. The PLA benefits from over 360 ISR satellites. They've got optical, multispectral, radar, and radio frequency sensors, and those increase its ability to detect U.S. aircraft carriers and expeditionary forces and air wings. Their version of GPS, it's called BETO. It provides them global 24-hour, very accurate position, navigation, and timing. They use BETO to enable their force movements and precision attack, and they've also launched 2 reusable experimental spacecraft. First was on orbit for 2 days, but the second was on orbit for 9 months, and both were observed releasing objects. To date, they've released minimal information regarding the purpose or the capabilities of those spacecraft. Now, intel suggests that the PLA, they likely see counter-space operations as a means to deter and to counter U.S. military intervention in a regional conflict. Moreover, their academics stress the necessity of, quote, destroying, damaging, and interfering with the enemy's reconnaissance and communication satellites in order to blind and deafen the enemy. They've demonstrated kinetic anti-satellite weapons. They destroyed one of their own satellites in 2007, and intel suggests that they intend to field more ASAT weapons capable of destroying satellites up to the geosynchronous orbit. They're developing satellite inspection and repair systems, which could easily function as weapons. In 2022, they used one of those to grab and move a defunct BETO satellite into a graveyard orbit above GEO. They've got multiple ground-based laser weapons. They incorporate jammers against space-based communications, radars, and navigation systems. And in 2022, they conducted the world's first fractional orbital launch of an ICBM with a hypersonic glide vehicle. I could go on, and this is just in an unclassified forum. The PLA's aspirations in space, they are lofty, and they are putting their money where their mouth is. The use of this critical domain for war fighting is the last thing that we want, but we have to be prepared to defend it if another nation decides to start that first ever space war. The bottom line to all this is that China is the pacing challenge for us, and they are rapidly improving their space capabilities to track and target our forces. And they're pursuing a wide range of counter-space capabilities to disrupt and degrade our space capabilities. So all of that discussion about threats brings us back to why the Space Force was created in 2019. The threats I've just highlighted, plus a lot more we can't even talk about here today, those solidified the need in our national leaders' minds that we needed a separate branch of the military just for space. And then what drove the need for the Space Force subsequently drove the need for the space components that we now have in the combatant commands. As I mentioned, we, the Space Forces Indo-Pacific, we stood up officially as a service component to Admiral Aquilino on 22 November 2022, so almost exactly a year ago. To get in the weeds for just a sec, because some of you may be interested, we are what's known as a component field command. And so we're a field comm, just like Space Operations Command or Space Systems Command in the Space Force. On the service side, Brigadier General Mastelier, he's the comm Space Force, the commander of Space Forces. But he's also been designated to be dual-hatted as the Theater Joint Force Space Component Commander, or the TJFSIC. So this puts him at the table with the other components like the JIFMIC and the JIFLIC and the JFAC under Admiral Aquilino. So understanding all that, what then is our role and our focus in the region? Ultimately, our foundational role is that we plan, integrate, synchronize, and execute space operations in support of Indo-PACOM, right? We are here in the theater working for COM Indo-PACOM, not the Space Force. We are here to support Indo-PACOM's O plans and operations with the overarching goal, of course, to ensure a free and open Indo-Pacific. So let me talk for a minute about our priorities. Now, of course, Admiral Aquilino's priorities are our priorities, but let me drill down just a little bit to get into some of the space-specific priorities that we're working on. First, Admiral Aquilino has directed his forces to seize the initiative. That's kind of his motto, seize the initiative. For us today, that means integrated deterrence. That means syncing our operations, realigning our posture, and advancing space capabilities in the theater. Now, our Chief of Space Operations, General Saltzman, he leveled kind of a complementary priority on us of rethinking space superiority. He said space superiority cannot just be space for space's sake, but it's got to be pointed towards supporting the terrestrial fight. So that's what we focus on. Now, we and U.S. Space Command specifically, they have a huge responsibility of protecting and defending all of those on-orbit assets from adverse actions. But until we're flying and fighting and holding territory in space, kind of Star Wars style, everything that we do in space is pointed towards supporting the fight here on the ground, in the air, on the sea, supporting the terrestrial fight. So everything that we do, everything that we innovate in space has got to be pointed towards protecting, supporting, and augmenting our joint forces down here on the surface. So that's really our main focus as a new component. How do we support the other Indo-PACOM components in this fight? And here, where we've got PAC Fleet and the JIFMIC named as the supported commander, we've really jumped fully in on figuring out how to best support the maritime domain. Now, Admiral Aquilino, he is laser focused on all domain synchronization of operations in order to deter adversaries. In almost every PACOM update brief I've been in, he stresses the importance of all the components integrating and synchronizing their operations, which presents an all-domain problem to the adversaries. This can be challenging for components who have traditionally focused kind of on their own domain, but undoubtedly, this is going to be an extremely contested environment out here, and the only way to fight through that is that we are all synchronized together. And beyond just our U.S. components synchronizing, we also have to integrate and synchronize with our allies and partners. I'm convinced that this environment out here, it's going to require a multilateral approach. At its core, our job in Space 4 Indo-PAC is to provide Admiral Aquilino options to deal with full spectrum threats through competition, crisis, and conflict if necessary. Okay, so given that threat, given kind of the complex environment I've described, what this means is we need to take a novel approach to an extremely difficult problem. Innovation in general is clearly required, but the challenge of innovating in space is daunting. There are some domain-specific challenges that we face in space that make space innovation, I think, harder than any other domain. For example, we currently struggle with long lead times associated with designing, acquiring, and launching on-orbit systems. What happens when we build a capability that, say, it's to get after a specific threat, but it takes 3 to 4 years or even a super responsive 18 months to build that system and launch it. And by that time, the threat's already evolved and the capability is ineffective. And even if the threat hasn't evolved, we tend to launch things that are already no longer on the cutting edge of technology. Traditionally, it may take 6 to 7 years to design and build a satellite, a year or two to launch it. And then if you have a 7-year design life, your tech is now 15 years old by the time it reaches the end of its design life. And our satellites usually last a lot longer than they're designed. This audience, you guys are well aware that 15 years old in the digital age, it's almost a joke, right? In Apple time, you'll have 15 new generations of iPhones in that time period. And they won't even have been supporting your 15-year-old phone for the last 10 years, right? So trying to fight an adversary with 15-year-old software and operating systems, it's not going to get it done. And of course, when something's on orbit, we're not currently really ready to bring it back down and fix it. So we need ways to be able to innovate more rapidly than our adversaries. But then space requires even more innovation on top of that to make it actually effective. So what are some areas that can help us move faster in space? I want to talk about a handful of things that I thought about that can maybe start to address some of those shortfalls. Now, I'm certain that these ideas, they won't be easy to implement. They'll be a huge challenge to develop and make work on orbit, but that's what you guys do, right? You guys think through those hard challenges. Now, of note, these are just some ideas that I came up with myself. These are not anything that the Space Force has directed anybody to work on yet. Just want to make that clear, but these are some ideas I have. So here's my list. First, I want to talk about software-defined radios. I think that could help us be much more resilient on orbit and defend against EW threats. To be able to change waveforms on our SATCOM platforms almost instantaneously, boy, that would provide some significant resiliency. Now, I'm sure there are difficulties that come into play with antenna design and things like that to support it. And we have learned from the Jitters program that that's really hard, even down on Earth, right? But that could provide significant advantage in communications. Now, of course, we need to make sure that we don't just focus on the space segment. We need to develop the receivers concurrently if we weren't able to use receivers that already exist. Unfortunately, we've seen multiple programs where the terrestrial receivers lag behind the on-orbit capability, so we need to make sure that we've learned that lesson. Next, how about satellite systems that are reprogrammable on orbit? Now, there's some capability to do that today, but really only to a small extent. Trying to upgrade to like a new operating system or change significant portions of software of a satellite on orbit, boy, at best, that's a white-knuckle experience, right, if someone even wants to attempt it. And when you're talking hundreds of millions to billion-dollar satellites, few are willing to actually take that risk. But in this area of smaller, less expensive satellites, I think we can start to get after developing systems that can handle modifications like that. Just think, to be able to upgrade your iPhone 11, which is already 6 years old, by the way, to iOS 17, the newest iOS, that could buy it years more of useful life if the hardware could handle the upgrade, right? So, boy, to be able to upgrade software on our 6-year-old satellite and make it act like a 1-year-old satellite, that would be significant. But then we also need to be forward thinking about the hardware that we build in these satellites. Things like processors and memory and cooling and all those things, we would need to be able to handle future upgrades like that. Speaking of hardware, what can we do about the physical components of an on-orbit system that are also going to be a decade old as they get into their prime years on orbit? Maybe the ability to service payloads on orbit could be a significant advantage. Now, that's got two pieces to it. First, you need the servicing system, right? You need a satellite that you can send up there to rendezvous with the old one and replace parts or refuel the satellites. But it also requires the operational satellites to be able to be serviced, right? And they're usually not built that way today. At the most basic level, this could mean refueling ports so that you can go up and you can refuel the satellite. That's something that's doable today. But it also means that hardware should be built to be accessible and swappable. Maybe you get modularized components that you can pull one out and you can just pop a new one in. We've seen that done with the Hubble. You've seen astronauts up doing that sort of thing. Kind of sounds like science fiction, but I'll tell you, the space environment is so unforgiving that to be able to replace things that go bad or are damaged by micrometeorites or radiation, that could be a game changer. Or in a contested environment, to repair things that were damaged by nefarious intent, that could also be critical. Alternatively, how about being able to bring those things back to Earth and fix them and relaunch them? We've had the capability to bring things back to Earth since the 80s with the space shuttle. But the business case just really wasn't there to be able to rapidly relaunch them and put them up again. Today, companies like SpaceX, they've proven that there is a business case for that now. There's the capability and there's the willingness to be able to launch on a weekly basis or even more often. So finding rides to put something back up, that's no longer just a dream. So maybe it's time to figure out how to go get those things, those high-cost systems that are broken, bring them back down and upgrade them or repair them. Or a way that we have seen demonstrated a lot lately by commercial industry, and it's now being pursued by the DoD as well, are proliferated constellations. We've got the capability to launch dozens of small satellites at a time. We can put up large constellations. That's available today. Currently, there's over 4,000 Starlink satellites on orbit. And the Space Development Agency, they're working a P-LEO, proliferated LEO constellation concept as well, projected in the 300 to 500 satellite range. Proliferated constellations of smaller, more inexpensive satellites, boy, there's a lot of advantages to those, including resilience just through sheer numbers, global coverage even if you sustain losses, and they complicate an adversary's targeting calculus. What proliferated constellations do, unfortunately, however, is they probably push an adversary away from targeting that on-orbit segment and towards finding other vulnerabilities, things like the command and control system, or the terrestrial links that pass the data back and forth. So we've got to put resiliency into those systems as well, whether it's through cyber defense, hardened facilities, backup facilities, things like that. I've got two more. First, the idea of multi-mission ground systems and C2 systems. Now, traditionally, when a new satellite is built, it's delivered with its own bespoke command and control system. It could link into and send commands through the military's satellite control network, but the software used to control the satellites and train the operators, it was completely different for every different satellite system that we bought. That's pretty inefficient. Going back to our mobile phone example for a second, we've seen the market settle in on just a handful of operating systems, right, that most phones use. You got iOS and Android and Windows Phone OS. Why did that happen? Well, for one, the hardware designers, I think they learned that it's probably not cost effective to build your own OS for every different phone you have. That's a huge undertaking. And the market itself likely drove some of that consolidation. People don't want to learn a different OS for every different phone they buy. You think about satellite command and control systems, they're not touching billions of people. So there's probably not that effect to drive the consolidation. And to be fair, the vendors have no incentive to do so either. The government pays them to develop their own. But the advantages we could see from having common C2 systems across our satellite constellations, that would be huge. Imagine the resiliency if all of our C2 systems were the same. They could back each other up. Operators could be trained on one on a common system and be able to operate anything. The government could probably save billions of dollars. Now, I realize the crowd I'm speaking to here and the idea of possibly reducing profits is probably not what you want to hear, but I'm just telling you what I think would be more efficient and effective for us. And in reality, the money's still going to be there, right? You'll just be able to use it to make your satellites and other systems better and not worry about the C2 systems. So common satellite buses and C2 systems, that could be a significant innovation that could give our forces the advantage we're looking for. And finally, my last idea for innovation is something that the Space Force is calling tactically responsive space, or TAC-RS. Now, this one's not really my own idea. The Space Force has been working on it, and Space Systems Command is already doing demonstrations of this. I just wanted to advocate for it today and talk a little bit about what it could bring to the fight. So TAC-RS, it's demonstrating the Space Force's capability to move faster to acquire, launch, and operate a space vehicle on operationally relevant timelines. It's another leg of that integrated deterrence that I talked about, and it ensures that the nation can credibly respond to aggression and to combatant command's urgent needs on relevant timelines. So we see a few options out there for the future of TAC-RS. It could come in the form of employing capabilities that are already stored on orbit, or it could be redirecting or repurposing existing commercial capacity under something the Space Force is calling their commercially augmented space reserve. It's somewhat analogous to the CRAF, or the Civil Reserve Air Fleet on the air side. It could also include repurposing existing space capability for a new and unintended purpose. Now, the first demonstration of TAC-RS, it was accomplished by SSC just 2 months ago, and it was a mission that they called Victus Nox. Victus Nox was designed to challenge our traditional assumptions and processes by demonstrating our capability, again, to rapidly acquire, launch, and operate a space vehicle. The mission highlighted progress towards shifting the paradigm for the launch enterprise toward a more tactically responsive space enterprise. Now, SSC, they worked with 2 commercial partners, with Firefly Aerospace and Millennium Space Systems, in order to build a satellite and have it ready to launch on order at an unknown time and to an unknown location. Less than a year after the contracts were let, the satellite was built, and then it was put on hot standby, and they put it on the shelf, and they awaited orders to launch. They didn't know where they were going to launch it, and they didn't know when. Just in September, they received the order to do it, to launch. The satellite was transported 165 miles from the launch site, or from where it was stored to the launch site. It was tested, it was fueled, mated to the rocket, and launched, all in less than 58 hours. The previous record was 21 days. So great success there. And so the success we saw with Victus Nox, it really marks a culture shift in our ability to deter adversary aggression in space and respond with the speed that we know we need to deliver those decisive space capabilities to our warfighters. And I think it can provide a competitive advantage. Now, the other thing that this demonstrated, Victus Nox, it was not only the ability to respond and launch quickly, but it was the ability to work hand in hand with commercial partners to make that happen. The Space Force, I will tell you, is fully committed to embracing commercial space and to utilizing this nation's growing commercial space capabilities to better protect and defend the space domain. The DoD and the intel community, they are actively engaged with commercial offerings, and they are now reaching into what was traditionally just the military domain. You've got commercial imagery, synthetic aperture radar, even space domain awareness capabilities on the commercial side that are growing by leaps and bounds. You may have even heard of Space Force's pitch days, where small businesses are invited to come in and pitch their new technologies. The first was held in 2021. They've had a few since, with contracts and dollars that are handed out on the spot to the pitches that are chosen. We are strongly encouraging businesses to partner with us to bring these newest technologies to the fight. And we are fully supportive of the increased commercial capabilities to improve the resilience of our sensing and our communications. An added benefit for us is that sometimes those commercial contracts can also provide us unclassified products that we can then share with partners who may not have access to our more sensitive capabilities. I could go on and on about other capabilities that we need, things like AI and ML, a space common operating picture, rapid delivery of cargo, novel PNT solutions in a contested environment. There's so many things we need, but the bottom line of all of this is that we need industry to keep bringing us the best technologies so that we can maintain our advantage. Okay, so that was a bunch of ideas of what I see as critical innovations that could help the Space Force and my space component to maintain stability here in the Pacific. Innovating in space, it is hard and it is expensive, but it's going to be absolutely critical to winning a fight in this AOR. The Secretary of the Air Force, he recently charged us to kind of do an introspective analysis of if we are ready for great power competition. Are we building and equipping our forces in the best way possible to compete against a near-peer adversary? The answer to that question, I think, is going to be largely informed by industry and what you guys can do for us. So, to close, in this theater, Admiral Aquilino, he's asked us to focus on being prepared now. In his posture statement earlier this year, he noted that the Chinese Communist Party directed 2027 as a target for the PLA to deliver the capabilities needed to counter U.S. military in the Indo-Pacific and to project power across the globe. And then, of course, we got the DPRK always out there ready to rattle their sword and take advantage of any situation that they can as well. We are in a campaigning phase right now where we are normalizing our operations throughout the AOR, and we are delivering interoperable and confident warfighting partners. But despite that near-term focus, which we've got to have, we also can't be completely nearsighted, especially given those long lead times that I talked about with building space capabilities. We got to do what we can to be ready now, but we also need to continue to work to gain that overmatch in the out years. It is a difficult problem, and it is really the driving reason for why the Space Force was created and why our space component stood up. Now, my team, they're working hard to integrate space into Admiral Aquilino's plans, but we need your help to accelerate your innovation in the space domain and bring us the capabilities that we need to stay in front of those adversaries. So with that, I will close. Thank you again so much for allowing me to speak today, and I believe we have some time for questions now. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. The first question from the audience this morning. With the DoD's ramp up in use of commercial low Earth orbit services, such as those available through the Commercial Satellite Communications Office, can you speak at all about what we're doing in the DoD to ensure security and availability of these services against a growing PLA threat?
Sure. So we just had a conversation last week with General Povak. He's the Deputy Director of the NRO. And we were talking about the Commercial Satellite Communications Office and some things that we're working with commercial partners for that very thing, for commercial LEO, for imagery and things like that. It really is critical. We, the NRO, the DoD in general, are fully on board with bringing on those commercial partners. The security piece, that gets into conversations that we have with those companies to ensure that that they are doing everything that they possibly can to keep their capabilities secure. But they're commercial capabilities, right? And so they can provide us, like I said, that unclass imagery and unclass space domain awareness information that we can then share. And that is huge for us. We are always looking for the ability to share things. We've got some partners that are cleared to some of our classified programs, and we have others that aren't. You've got an earthquake or a hurricane in the theater with the Solomon Islands, who we can't really share classified information with. But boy, if we can get unclassified commercial imagery, that's a win, and we can provide them that, and it's an amazing opportunity. And so, yes, we need to work hard to ensure that they are secure from the constant Chinese cyber threats, but we are working hard with them to do that and to make sure that we can use their products as well.
Thank you, sir. You did just mention our coalition partners. Mm-hmm. Can you expand at all on what the initiatives or mechanisms are in place to ensure effective communication and information sharing among coalition members, and what role will our partners play in accomplishing mission priorities in this AOR? Yeah, absolutely. So I'll speak specifically on the space side a little bit. We have many partners in the Indo-Pacific AOR that we work closely with. Probably the closest right now is honestly Korea. We actually stood up a component similar to mine in Korea. It's called Space Forces Korea, just a little less than a year ago now. It is a subcomponent to our Space Forces Indo-Pac, and they are fully tied in with the Koreans. They are embedded right there at Osan Air Base in Korea, and working hard with the Koreans on providing them the space capabilities that they need. We're going to stand up a component in Japan, probably within the next 6 months or so, we're hoping, and we'll have another space component with USFJ in Japan. Japan is very excited to do more and more with space. They are constantly engaging with us. They have a lot of capability that they are building themselves to bring to the fight in addition to sharing with us. And of course, our stalwart partners, the UK and Australia, they are out here in theater. We're working with them all the time. We've had conversations with both of those countries. They want to embed LNOs in my component, both a Brit and an Aussie in my component. We're working hard to make that happen as well. We play with all of those partners in multiple exercises every year. Korea has a bunch of exercises. We're doing an exercise with Japan called Keynote in January that we work closely with them. And most of the other major theater exercises, UK and Australia are fully involved with. So the information sharing with them, it's easier when it's partners that are part of our Five Eyes that we can share classified. It's a little harder with others that are not, but we are working hard to continue to build those relationships, to have MOAs and agreements in place to be able to share more and more information with them. And like I said, going alone in a fight in this theater is not the way to win. We absolutely need those partners, and we're working hard with them.
Thank you, sir. Next audience question. Does the stand-up of space component commanders in the combatant command AORs change the operational control of space assets, most of which are national assets or controlled by the intelligence community?
Sure. So let me differentiate between a couple different parts of space right now. So when you talk on-orbit assets, actually satellites flying around, command and controlled up in space, those belong to U.S. Space Command or to the IC, to the NRO, to actually command and control and fly those systems. We here, as an Indo-Pacific component, we aren't commanding or controlling anything on orbit. Our focus is support to the terrestrial fight. And so we do have some other things, space-related things that can bring capability to the fight. Some of those will be controlled by our component. Some of those will remain controlled by U.S. Space Command. As you might imagine, there's a little bit of a constant tension there between should theater command and control things or U.S. Space Command, but there's healthy discussions all the time on what is the best way to do that. We continue to have those discussions all the time. We've had those discussions for 30 years. And so those continue, but again, the basics are the on-orbit things will remain controlled by U.S. Space Command and they're in a row, and things on the ground in theater, perhaps by us and perhaps by U.S. Space Command.
Thank you, sir. Our next question. What is the U.S. Space Force Indo-Pac doing for PM Tech?
Yeah, so we had the PIMTech folks come and brief us, probably a month ago. And to be honest, that was our first introduction to the program. We are super excited about it. We do exercises all the time out here. I think we participate in, at least 6 major exercises a year. And we talked a lot with them about being able to use some of their funding and their programs to help us in our exercises, whether it's bringing capabilities out to theater, whether it's increasing our capability to command and control assets, all those sorts of things. I think PIMTech is going to be a great opportunity for us to gain some additional funding and to gain some additional help with continuing to increase the capability and capacity of the space stuff that we do in this theater. So I think that'll be a really good partnership.
Thank you, sir. There is a perception that DoD leadership has not fully advocated for robust and sustained investment in a modernized SDN-based enterprise management and control ecosystem layered across our global MILSATCOM architecture. And as a result, it's never been built or fielded. How is your space component addressing that head-on, especially as DoD is now rapidly provisioning emergency commercial SATCOM capabilities to augment and backstop MILSATCOM?
So being out here in the component, I'm not back in the halls of the Pentagon working some of that future programming stuff, like the decisions to build or to not build some of that satellite control network stuff you talked about. I wasn't involved with that. I have a personal opinion. I'll keep that to myself right now. But certainly the creation of the Space Force was to get after that sort of problem. We saw when space was in the Air Force, and the Air Force did an amazing job of getting space to where it is now. But there's always competing priorities, right? You're fighting to compete against F-22s and B-21s and all those sorts of things, and there's a limited amount of money. And so I believe Congress saw that as one of the driving factors to have a separate Space Force, so we could focus just on space, have our own budget, be able to be a voice at the table for ourselves when those discussions happen, to say, no, we really do need these satellite control network things, and here's why. And so I believe going forward, having the Space Force and having our own voice will help to get after some of those problems that you described. Pivoting towards using commercial capabilities, I mean, that's really just a brand new option for us, all right? That wasn't around even 5 years ago, really, to have that opportunity to use commercial augmentation as a backup. it's an awesome capability. We all know that the DoD procurement process is not rapid, right? And so we have a lot of things we're working on. They just take time. And to have that commercial capability available to help us to backstop, to give us additional capability, it's amazing. And so the Space Force, like I said, is fully in on working with all those commercial partners to augment, to help us with SATCOM and imagery and all those things. And we will continue to work that hard as we wait for our programs of record to continue to come through and give us that capability.
Thank you, sir. That was the last question that we have time for this morning. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Linda Newton, Senior Executive Service, retired, Board of Directors, AFCEA Hawaii.
I'd like to offer a big mahalo to Colonel Jason Schramm. Quite interesting remarks today, and he gave us a lot to think about. He talked about the reality of the real world and the threats that we face in this theater. He talked about that the mission of the Space Component Commander for the Indo-Pacific Command is to support the fight in all domains. And I think he provided a lot of opportunities both for the government side and especially for our industry partners for both innovative and needed technology solutions. So to thank you and all of our speakers this week, we are making a donation to the Friends of Windward Wounded Warriors. And I'm also happy to present you with the 38th TechNet Indo-Pacific coin and the AFCEA Hawaii 70th Anniversary coin. And once I do that, I ask you to remain seated for our MC to make his closing remarks this morning.